Don't touch what you're not qualified to understand. CEO Veronica Pierce's voice cut through the cold hangar air at Vanguard Aerospace. Wind howled past the glass, enclosing a fighter jet behind her. The man in the janitorial uniform stood frozen, mop still in hand. For a moment, his eyes flashed with something raw, the kind of pain that only comes from flying where heroes are born and broken. But why would a former pilot end up nameless, scrubbing floors in the shadow of war machines? And what would happen when that secret was dragged into the light? The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Ethan Cole pushed the mop bucket down the corridor of Vanguard Aerospace's main facility. It was nearly midnight. Most of the engineers had gone home hours ago, leaving behind coffee-stained desks and blueprints covered in red ink. He moved quietly, the way he always did, keeping his head down and his hands busy. 35 years old, former F-16 pilot, Valor Squadron. None of that mattered anymore. What mattered was the $73 he'd earned tonight. What mattered was getting home before sunrise so he could make breakfast for Laya, his 8-year-old daughter, before she woke up. What mattered was keeping the lights on in their one-bedroom apartment on the east side of the city, where the rent was cheap and the neighbors didn't ask questions. His wife had died 3 years ago. Cancer. The kind that moved fast and left no room for miracles. After that, the nightmares came back. The ones from the crash. The ones where he couldn't pull up in time, couldn't save his wingman, couldn't do anything but watch the ground rush up to meet him. The Air Force offered him a desk job. He couldn't take it. Flying was over. So was everything that came with it. Now he cleaned floors in the same building where experimental aircraft were born. He walked past prototypes that would never see him as anything more than part of the furniture. And that was fine. He didn't need to be seen. He just needed to survive. Ethan turned the corner into the testing wing and stopped. The door to the restricted hangar was open. That wasn't supposed to happen. Security was tight here. Engineers needed clearance just to look at the equipment inside, let alone touch it. He stepped closer. A small figure stood near the glass partition, staring up at the jet mounted behind it. The Apex 7 prototype. Vanguard's most advanced engine design. Millions of dollars in research, all packed into a machine built to break the sound barrier twice over. The figure turned. Laya. Ethan's chest tightened. She wasn't supposed to be here. He'd told Mrs. Callahan, the neighbor who watched her on late shifts, to keep her inside. But Laya had a habit of slipping out when she got curious, and tonight, apparently, she'd followed him. Laya, Ethan said quietly, walking toward her. What are you doing here? She looked up at him with wide eyes, the kind that held too much wonder for a world this sharp. I wanted to see where you work. Before he could respond, the lights in the hangar flared on. Footsteps echoed from the far end of the hall. Ethan turned. Veronica Pierce stood at the entrance, flanked by 2 security guards. She was younger than most CEOs, 32 at most, with dark hair pulled back tight and a suit that cost more than Ethan made in 6 months. Her father had built Vanguard from the ground up, and when he died 2 years ago, she inherited the whole empire. She'd been running it like a dictator ever since, her eyes locked onto Laya. Who let a child into a restricted area? Veronica's voice was cold, sharp enough to cut glass. Ethan stepped forward, placing himself between his daughter and the CEO. She's with me. I'll get her out of here. Veronica's gaze shifted to him. For a moment, she said nothing. Then her expression hardened. You're the janitor. Yes. And you brought your child into a secure testing facility. She wandered in. I didn't bring her. Veronica's jaw tightened. She turned to the guards. Escort them both out, and make sure he understands that if this happens again, he's fired. Laya's hand gripped Ethan's. He could feel her trembling. She's 8, Ethan said quietly. She didn't know. Veronica took a step closer. I don't care. This is a billion-dollar operation, not a daycare. If you can't control your child, maybe you shouldn't be here at all. The words landed like a punch. Ethan felt something twist in his chest, something old and familiar. Anger, shame, the weight of being invisible. But he didn't say anything. He couldn't afford to. He took Laya's hand and led her toward the exit. She looked back once at the jet behind the glass, then at Veronica, then down at the floor. Ethan didn't look back at all. 2 days later, Ethan was reassigned to the night shift in the engine testing wing. It was the loudest, dirtiest part of the facility, where the air smelled like fuel and burnt metal. Most janitors avoided it, but Ethan didn't mind. It kept him busy. It kept him away from people. He was wiping down a control panel when he heard voices from the observation deck above. Engineers. A lot of them. He glanced up and saw the testing chamber lit up. The Apex 7 engine mounted on the rig in the center of the room. They were running a simulation. Ethan recognized the setup immediately. High-altitude burn test, 20,000 feet equivalent. The kind of stress test that separated good engines from dead ones. He watched as the lead engineer, a man in his 50s with graying hair, gave the signal. The engine roared to life. The sound was deafening, even through the reinforced glass. Flames erupted from the exhaust, controlled and precise. But something was wrong. Ethan's eyes narrowed. The mounting bracket on the left side was vibrating. Not much, just enough. He'd seen it before, back when he was still flying. A bolt torqued too tight, or not tight enough. Either way, it wouldn't hold under sustained pressure. He moved closer to the glass, his heart starting to race. The vibration increased. The engineers didn't notice. They were focused on the readouts, on the data streaming across their monitors. Ethan's hand pressed against the glass. If that bracket failed at altitude, the engine would tear itself apart. And if it tore apart in flight, the pilot wouldn't have time to eject. He turned and ran toward the stairs leading up to the observation deck. His boots hit the metal steps hard, the sound lost beneath the roar of the engine. He reached the top and pushed through the door. The engineers turned, surprised. "Shut it down," Ethan said. The lead engineer frowned. "Excuse me?" "The left mounting bracket." "It's going to fail. Shut it down." "Who the hell are you?" "I'm telling you to shut it down." The man's expression shifted from confusion to irritation. "Security, get this guy out of here." One of the guards stepped forward, but Ethan didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on the engine. "If you don't shut it down, people are going to die." The lead engineer's face flushed red. "You're a janitor. You don't get to tell us how to do our jobs." Ethan's jaw tightened. He could feel the weight of every choice pressing down on him. He could walk away, keep his head down, stay invisible, or he could do what he was trained to do. He turned to the control console and slammed his hand down on the emergency shutdown button. The engine's roar cut off instantly. The room went silent. The lead engineer stared at him, speechless. Then his face twisted with rage. "You just sabotaged a $20 million test." "I just saved your life," Ethan said quietly. Before anyone could respond, the door to the observation deck opened. Veronica Pierce stepped inside, her heels clicking against the floor. Her eyes swept across the room, landing on Ethan. "What's going on here?" The lead engineer pointed at Ethan. "This janitor shut down the test without authorization." Veronica's gaze didn't leave Ethan. "Is that true?" Ethan met her eyes. The mounting bracket was going to fail. If it had failed during flight, your pilot would be dead. "And you know this how?" "Because I've seen it happen before." Veronica studied him for a long moment. Then she turned to the lead engineer. "Check the bracket." The man hesitated, then nodded. He motioned to one of the technicians, who climbed down into the testing chamber. A minute later, the technician called up. "Left bracket's loose. Torque is off by 15%. The room went still. Veronica turned back to Ethan. Her expression was unreadable. "What's your name?" "Ethan Cole." "How did you know?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on him. He could feel the weight of the truth pressing against his ribs. "I used to fly," he said finally. Veronica's eyes narrowed. "Fly what?" "F-16s. Valor Squadron." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Then Veronica turned and walked out of the room without another word. Ethan stood there, surrounded by engineers who wouldn't meet his eyes, and realized he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. Or maybe he'd finally stopped running from it. The rumors started the next morning. Ethan heard them in fragments as he moved through the facility. Whispers in the break room, glances from engineers who'd never looked at him before. By noon, half the building knew that the janitor had shut down a test. By the end of the day, they knew he'd claimed to be a pilot. Most of them didn't believe it. Why would a hero end up mopping floors? Ethan kept his head down and his mouth shut. He'd said too much already. The smartest thing he could do now was disappear back into the background, let the gossip fade, and hope Veronica Pierce forgot he existed. But the whispers didn't stop. On the third day, one of the younger engineers cornered him in the supply closet. The man was maybe 26, fresh out of grad school, still eager to prove himself. "Is it true?" the engineer asked. "You really flew F-16s?" Ethan didn't look up from the cleaning supplies he was organizing. "Does it matter?" "I mean, yeah, if you actually know what you're talking about, maybe we should be listening." "You shouldn't." The engineer frowned. "Why not?" Ethan finally met his eyes. "Because I'm not that person anymore." He pushed past the engineer and left. But the questions kept coming. In hallways, in the parking lot, even from the security guards who'd escorted him out of the testing wing weeks before. Everyone wanted to know if the rumor was true. And if it was, why he was here. Ethan never answered. At home, things weren't much better. Leia came home from school one afternoon with a strange look on her face. She dropped her backpack by the door and sat down at the small kitchen table, watching Ethan make dinner. "Someone at school said you used to be in the military," she said quietly. Ethan's hand stilled over the cutting board. "Who told you that?" "Sarah's mom. She works at Vanguard. She said you were a pilot." Ethan set down the knife and turned to face his daughter. "Yeah, I was." Leia's eyes widened. "Like a real pilot? In planes?" "In jets. Why didn't you tell me?" Ethan pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "Because it was a long time ago. Before you were born. Before your mom." "But you were a pilot," Leia repeated, like she was trying to make the words make sense. "And now you clean buildings." "Yeah. Why?" Ethan looked at his daughter, at the confusion and curiosity in her face, and realized he couldn't hide from this forever. "Because something bad happened," he said quietly. "And I couldn't fly anymore." "What happened?" Ethan's throat tightened. "Someone I cared about got hurt. And it was my fault." Leia was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across the table and took his hand. "I don't think it was your fault," she said. Ethan's vision blurred. He squeezed her hand and didn't say anything else. The call came 3 days later. Ethan was summoned to Veronica Pierce's office. The executive floor was a different world. Polished marble, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the runway, where Vanguard's prototypes were tested. Ethan had never been up here before. He didn't belong. Veronica's assistant led him into the corner office and closed the door behind him. Veronica sat behind a glass desk, her hands folded in front of her. She didn't stand, didn't smile. Just watched him with the same cold precision she'd used in the hangar. "Sit," she said. Ethan sat. Veronica leaned back in her chair. "I looked into your file." Ethan's chest tightened. "You weren't lying," she continued. "You did fly F-16s, Valor Squadron, 17 confirmed missions, 2 commendations. Then you were discharged after a training accident that killed your wingman." The words hit like shrapnel. Ethan's hands clenched in his lap. Veronica's eyes didn't soften. "So why are you here? Why aren't you flying?" "Because I can't," Ethan said quietly. "Can't or won't. Does it matter?" Veronica studied him for a long moment. Then she stood and walked to the window, her back to him. "My father built this company from nothing," she said. "He believed in precision, in excellence, in surrounding himself with the best people, not the cheapest. When he died, I inherited a board that thought I was too young, too emotional, too female to run this place." She turned to face him. "So I had to prove them wrong, every day, every decision. I can't afford mistakes. I can't afford sentimentality. And I can't afford to have a janitor playing hero in my testing wing." "Then fire me," Ethan said. Veronica's jaw tightened. "I should. But the engineers are talking. Some of them think you saved the test. Others think you're delusional. Either way, you're a problem. I didn't ask to be. No, you just couldn't stay quiet." Ethan met her eyes. "Would you have preferred I let the engine explode?" Veronica didn't answer. She walked back to her desk and sat down, her fingers drumming once against the glass surface. "Go back to work," she said finally. "But stay away from the testing wing. And don't speak to the engineers. If I hear your name one more time, you're done." Ethan stood and left without another word. That night, alone in his apartment after Laya had gone to bed, Ethan sat in the dark and let the memories come. He was back in the cockpit, 23 years old, invincible. The desert stretched out below him, endless and golden in the late afternoon sun. His wingman, Marcus, flew beside him, close enough that Ethan could see him through the canopy. They were running a training exercise. Simple, routine, the kind they'd done 100 times. Then Marcus's engine failed. Ethan heard it over the radio, the sudden silence where the roar should have been. Marcus's voice, calm at first, then urgent. "I've got a flameout. Going to manual restart." Ethan pulled up beside him, watching. "You've got altitude. Take your time." But the restart didn't work, and Marcus was losing speed, losing lift. "I'm punching out," Marcus said. "Do it," Ethan urged. "Eject now." But something went wrong. The ejection seat fired, but the canopy didn't separate cleanly. Marcus was thrown into it at 300 miles per hour. Ethan watched his best friend's plane spiral into the desert floor. He landed 20 minutes later and walked away from the jet. He never flew again. The Air Force cleared him, said it was a mechanical failure, not his fault. But Ethan knew better. He'd been the flight lead. He should have seen the warning signs, should have called off the exercise. He should have saved Marcus. Now, sitting in the darkness of his apartment, Ethan pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes and tried to breathe through the weight crushing his chest. He'd spent 3 years running from this, from the guilt, from the memory, from the sky itself. And now it was all coming back. Veronica stayed late in her office that night. She pulled Ethan's personnel file again, reading through the details she'd skimmed before. Valor Squadron, decorated pilot, honorable discharge. She opened a second file, her father's accident report from 15 years ago. Engine failure during a test flight. Aircraft went down hard. The pilot should have died, but someone pulled him out. Veronica had been 17. She remembered sitting in the hospital, watching her father's chest rise and fall, the machines beeping steadily beside him. He'd been unconscious for 2 days. When he finally woke up, the first thing he said was, "There was a pilot. He pulled me out." "Who?" Veronica had asked. Her father shook his head. "I don't know his name, but he had wings, tattooed on his arm." Veronica had never followed up, never asked. Life moved on. Her father recovered. She went to college, built a career, and when her father died 2 years ago, she inherited everything. Now, staring at Ethan Cole's file, she felt something cold settle in her stomach. Wings. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out an old photograph, her father standing beside a fighter jet, his arm around a young pilot. She'd found it in his office after he died. The pilot's face was turned away from the camera, but his forearm was visible. A tattoo. Wings. Veronica's hand trembled. She grabbed her phone and pulled up the security footage from the testing wing. Found the moment Ethan had confronted the lead engineer. Zoomed in on his face, his posture, the way he carried himself. This wasn't a janitor. This was a soldier. She closed the file and sat back in her chair, staring out at the dark runway beyond the window. If Ethan Cole was the man who saved her father, then she'd spent the last 6 months treating a hero like he was invisible, and she had no idea how to fix that. 2 weeks passed. Ethan worked the graveyard shift in the administrative wing, far from the hangars and testing chambers. He saw Laya every morning, made her breakfast, walked her to the bus stop. She asked him once why he looked so tired. He told her he was fine. He wasn't. The nightmares were getting worse. Every time he closed his eyes, he was back in the cockpit, watching Marcus's plane spiral into the desert. Every time he woke up, he was alone in a room that smelled like disinfectant and failure. He thought about quitting, finding work somewhere else. Somewhere he wouldn't have to see the jets. Somewhere he wouldn't have to remember. But jobs were hard to find, and Laya needed stability. So he stayed. On a Thursday afternoon, Vanguard announced a public demonstration of the Apex 7 engine. It was supposed to be a showcase for investors, a chance to prove the technology worked. The entire facility buzzed with preparation. Engineers worked double shifts, security tightened, and Veronica Pierce gave a press conference promising that Vanguard was about to redefine aerospace engineering. Ethan watched it on a break room television, surrounded by other janitors who didn't care. He recognized the setup. Live engine test, full throttle. 20,000 feet equivalent. The same test he'd stopped 2 weeks ago. He told himself it wasn't his problem anymore. The day of the demonstration arrived. Ethan wasn't scheduled to work, but he got a call from his supervisor asking him to cover a last-minute shift. Someone had called in sick. They needed extra hands to clean up after the event. He almost said no. But the money was good, and Laya was spending the day with Mrs. Callahan. So he went. The facility was packed. Investors in expensive suits, journalists with cameras, engineers in lab coats standing near the observation deck, their faces tight with nervous pride. Ethan moved through the crowd like a ghost, pushing a cleaning cart, picking up discarded coffee cups. He saw Veronica near the front, talking to a man in a military uniform. She looked composed, controlled. Every inch the CEO her father had raised her to be. Ethan wondered if she ever got tired of pretending. The demonstration began at 3 o'clock. The Apex 7 engine was mounted in the testing chamber, visible through reinforced glass. A pilot's seat had been installed for show, though no one would actually fly it. The test would be remote-controlled from the observation deck. Ethan found a spot near the back of the crowd and watched as the lead engineer gave the countdown. Engine ignition in 10 seconds. The room went quiet. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The engine roared to life. Flames erupted from the exhaust, controlled and beautiful. The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. Veronica smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. Ethan's gaze shifted to the mounting brackets. They looked solid, secure. The engineers had fixed the problem. He'd been wrong to worry. And then he saw it. A hairline crack in the secondary fuel line, barely visible. But there, his blood went cold. "Shut it down," he whispered. No one heard him. The engine's roar grew louder. The fuel line trembled. The crack widened. "Shut it down!" Ethan shouted. Heads turned. Security started moving toward him, but Ethan was already running, pushing through the crowd, his cleaning cart forgotten. He reached the observation deck just as the fuel line ruptured. The explosion was instant. A fireball tore through the testing chamber, shattering the reinforced glass. People screamed. Alarms blared. Smoke poured into the room, thick and black. Ethan didn't think. He just moved. He vaulted over the railing and dropped into the testing chamber. The heat was overwhelming. The air filled with smoke and burning fuel. He could barely see, but he could hear someone coughing, choking. He found the source, a young engineer, mid-20s, pinned under a piece of debris. Kyle. Ethan had seen him around the facility, always the first one in, last one out. "I've got you," Ethan said, grabbing the debris and lifting. His shoulder screamed in protest, the old injury from the crash. But he didn't stop. Kyle scrambled free, gasping for air. Ethan pulled him toward the exit, half dragging, half carrying him through the smoke. They made it to the edge of the chamber just as the secondary fuel tank ignited. The blast threw them both forward. Ethan hit the ground hard, his vision blurring. Someone grabbed his arm, pulled him up. He looked down and saw his sleeve torn, hanging in shreds. And then he saw the tattoo. Wings of Valor, the emblem of his squadron, inked into his forearm 15 years ago, back when he still believed in things like honor and purpose. He looked up. The crowd was staring. Cameras were pointed at him, and Veronica Pierce stood at the edge of the observation deck, her face pale, her eyes locked on the tattoo. She knew. The media frenzy started within the hour. By evening, Ethan's face was on every news channel. Former F-16 pilot saves Vanguard engineer. Hero janitor revealed. The man behind the mop. Ethan sat in a hospital room, his shoulder bandaged, his mind numb. Kyle was in the next room, stable. The doctors said he'd make a full recovery. Laya sat beside Ethan, her hand gripping his. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The door opened, but it wasn't Veronica. It was 3 men in suits. Members of Vanguard's board of directors. The oldest one, a man with silver hair and a face like granite, stepped forward. "Mr. Cole," he said, "we need to talk about what happened today." Ethan looked at him. "Kyle's alive. That's what happened. You also caused a panic, disrupted a major investor event, and exposed a critical safety failure that's now all over the news. Would you have preferred I let him die?" The man's jaw tightened. "We're not saying that. But this situation has created a liability for Vanguard, and Ms. Pierce's decision to keep you employed, despite previous incidents, reflects poorly on her judgment." Ethan's hands clenched. "This isn't about her. Actually, it is. The board is meeting tomorrow to discuss her future with the company, and yours." The men left without another word. Ethan sat in silence, staring at the door, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on him. He'd tried to save someone, and now it might cost Veronica everything. Veronica didn't sleep that night. She sat in her office, watching the news coverage on loop. Ethan pulling Kyle from the flames, the tattoo visible on his arm, the questions from reporters about who he was and why he'd been working as a janitor. And then she pulled up the security footage again, zoomed in on the tattoo. Wings of Valor. She opened the old photograph from her desk, her father and the unknown pilot. It was him. Ethan Cole had saved her father 15 years ago, and she'd repaid him by treating him like he was worthless. Her phone buzzed, a message from the board chair. "Emergency meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Be prepared to explain your decisions." Veronica set the phone down and looked out at the city lights beyond her window. She'd spent 2 years building walls around herself, proving she was strong enough, cold enough, good enough. And in the process, she'd forgotten what her father actually stood for. Tomorrow, she'd have to choose, protect herself or protect the man who'd saved her father's life. For the first time in years, the choice was easy. The next 48 hours were chaos. The board of directors demanded answers. Investors threatened to pull funding. The press camped outside Vanguard's gates, shouting questions at anyone who walked by. And Veronica Pierce, for the first time in her career, had no control. She called an emergency press conference, stood in front of the cameras with her hands shaking and her voice steady. 2 days ago, an accident occurred during a demonstration of our Apex 7 engine, she said. A fuel line failure caused an explosion that could have killed one of our engineers. It didn't, because a man named Ethan Cole risked his life to save him. She looked directly into the camera. Ethan Cole is a former F-16 pilot, a decorated veteran, and for the past 6 months, he's been working as a janitor in this facility. Not because he wasn't qualified for more, but because I didn't see him, because I didn't look. Her voice broke. 15 years ago, Ethan saved my father's life. And 2 days ago, he saved one of my employees. He's not a janitor, he's a hero. And I owe him everything. The room erupted in questions. Veronica didn't answer any of them. She walked off the stage and disappeared into her office. Ethan watched the press conference from his apartment. Laya sat beside him, her eyes wide. "Is that true?" she asked. "Did you really save people?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Then why don't you fly anymore?" Ethan looked at his daughter, at the innocence in her eyes, at the question he'd been avoiding for 3 years. "Because I was afraid," he said quietly. "I thought if I stopped flying, I'd stop losing people." "But you didn't stop," Laya said. "You saved that man." Ethan's throat tightened. "Yeah," he whispered. "I did." 3 days after the explosion, Ethan returned to Vanguard, not to clean, but because Veronica had asked him to come to her office. He found her standing by the window, staring out at the runway. "I'm stepping down," she said without turning around. Ethan frowned. "What?" "The board wants my resignation. They think I'm a liability, and maybe they're right." "That's not true." Veronica turned to face him. "I built this company on my father's legacy, but I forgot what he actually stood for. He believed in people, in second chances. I believed in perfection, and it almost got someone killed." She walked to her desk and picked up a folder. "I want to offer you a position. Chief Safety Officer. You'd oversee all testing protocols. Make sure what happened never happens again." Ethan stared at her. "I'm not qualified for that. You're the most qualified person I know." "I can't." Veronica's expression hardened. "Why not?" "Because I can't go back to that world," Ethan said quietly. "I can't be around jets and engines and people who think I'm something I'm not." "Then what do you want?" Ethan thought about Laya. About the way her eyes lit up when she saw the planes. About the way she asked him questions he didn't know how to answer. "I want to build something," he said finally. "Not for investors. Not for the military. For kids like my daughter. Kids who love flying but don't have a way in." Veronica's eyes softened. "A training center," Ethan continued. "Free. Open to anyone. Not just the ones who can afford it." Veronica set the folder down. "That's expensive." "I know. And it'll take years." "I know." Veronica looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Okay," she said. "Let's do it." The backlash came fast. Within a week, the board of directors leaked internal memos questioning Veronica's judgment. Investors pulled meetings. Trade publications ran editorials asking whether Vanguard Aerospace had become too distracted by sentiment to remain competitive. The stock price dropped 8% in 3 days. Veronica didn't flinch. She called a full company meeting in the main hangar, standing on a platform in front of 200 employees, engineers, technicians, administrative staff, even the janitors. Ethan stood in the back, arms crossed, watching. "I know what people are saying," Veronica began, her voice steady but stripped of its usual steel. They're saying I've lost focus, that I'm prioritizing optics over operations, that I'm letting emotion cloud my decisions. She looked out at the crowd. Maybe they're right, but my father didn't build this company by playing it safe. He built it by believing that the best ideas come from the people everyone else overlooks. He believed in second chances, in redemption, and I forgot that. Her eyes found Ethan in the back. Ethan Cole saved a man's life, but more than that, he reminded me why we're here. We don't build engines to impress investors. We build them to push boundaries, to make the impossible real. And we can't do that if we forget the people who make it happen. She stepped down from the platform. The room was silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping. Slowly at first. Then others joined in. Not everyone, but enough. Ethan didn't clap. He just watched Veronica walk past him toward the exit, her shoulders a little less rigid than they'd been a week ago. The training center became Veronica's new obsession. She redirected funding from 3 non-essential projects, pulled in architects, hired educators. Within 2 months, blueprints were drawn up for a facility on the east side of the Vanguard campus. It would have flight simulators, classroom space, and a small hangar for hands-on training with decommissioned aircraft. Ethan was involved in every decision. He didn't want the title, didn't want the office, but Veronica insisted he be part of the planning, and eventually he stopped arguing. They met twice a week in her office, going over budgets and timelines. The conversations were different now, less formal. Veronica asked questions about his time in Valor Squadron, about what it felt like to fly, about how he'd known the fuel line would fail. Ethan answered carefully. He didn't talk about the crash, didn't talk about his wingman. But he talked about the rest, about the feeling of breaking the sound barrier, about the way the world looked from 30,000 feet. Veronica listened like she was hearing it for the first time. One afternoon, she asked him why he'd stopped. Ethan looked out the window at the runway below. Because I couldn't trust myself anymore. Why not? Because I made a mistake, and someone died. Veronica didn't push. She just nodded, like she understood. My father used to say that mistakes don't define you, she said quietly. It's what you do after that matters. Ethan looked at her. Do you believe that? Veronica's smile was faint, almost sad. I'm trying to. 3 months into the project, disaster struck again. Laia had been spending more time at the facility. Veronica had arranged for a small classroom space where she could do homework while Ethan worked. It wasn't official, but no one complained. One afternoon, Laia wandered into one of the equipment storage areas. She was looking for Ethan, but he was in a meeting. She saw a stack of metal panels leaning against the wall and climbed up to see what was behind them. The panels shifted. She tried to jump back, but her foot caught on a loose cable. The stack came down on top of her. Ethan heard the crash from 2 floors up. He ran. By the time he reached the storage area, a crowd had gathered. Paramedics were already there, lifting the panels off a small figure lying motionless on the floor. Ethan's world went silent. He pushed through the crowd and dropped to his knees beside Laia. Her eyes were closed. Blood seeped from a cut on her forehead. Laia, he whispered, his voice breaking. Laia, stay with me. One of the paramedics put a hand on his shoulder. She's breathing. We need to get her to the hospital. Ethan rode in the ambulance, holding Laia's hand the entire way. She didn't wake up. At the hospital, the doctor said she had a concussion and a fractured wrist. She'd need observation for 24 hours, but she'd be okay. Ethan sat beside her bed, his head in his hands, and felt everything collapse. This was his fault. He'd brought her into that world. He'd let her get too close to the machines, to the danger. He'd thought he could protect her by keeping her near him, but all he'd done was put her at risk. The door opened. Veronica stepped inside, her face pale. How is she? Veronica asked softly. She'll be fine, Ethan said without looking up. Veronica moved closer, standing at the foot of the bed. Ethan, I'm so sorry. This shouldn't have happened. The storage area should have been secured. I should have— Don't, Ethan interrupted, his voice raw. This isn't on you. It's on me. I should have kept her away from that place. She wanted to be there because of you, because you made her feel like she belonged. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. She doesn't belong there. Neither do I. Veronica was quiet for a moment. Then she sat down in the chair across from him. When my father died, she said quietly, I thought the only way to honor him was to be perfect, to never make mistakes, to never let anyone see me weak. She looked at Laya, still unconscious in the bed. But I was wrong. He didn't build Vanguard by being perfect. He built it by caring, and I forgot that. I forgot what it means to actually see people. She met Ethan's eyes. You didn't fail her. You showed her what it means to fight for something, to care about something bigger than yourself. That's not a mistake. That's everything. Ethan's throat tightened. He didn't respond. Veronica stood and walked to the door. Before she left, she turned back. The training center, she said. We're calling it the Valor Foundation, if that's okay with you. Ethan looked up at her, his vision blurred. Yeah, he whispered. That's okay. Laya woke up 6 hours later. The first thing she saw was Ethan sitting beside her, his hand wrapped around hers. Daddy, she murmured. Ethan's chest collapsed with relief. Hey, sweetheart, you're okay. You're going to be okay. Laya blinked, her eyes focusing. What happened? You got hurt. But the doctors fixed you up. You just need to rest. Laya looked down at the cast on her wrist. Then she looked back at Ethan. Are you mad at me? She asked quietly. Ethan's heart broke. No. God, no, I'm not mad. I'm just glad you're okay. Laya's eyes filled with tears. I wanted to see the planes. I wanted to be like you. Ethan leaned forward, brushing the hair from her face. You don't have to be like me. You just have to be you. And that's more than enough. Laya sniffled, then smiled faintly. Can I still go to the training center when it's done? Ethan's laugh was shaky, half a sob. Yeah, you can go. 1 year later, the Valor Foundation opened its doors. The facility was smaller than Vanguard's main campus, but it gleamed with possibility. Flight simulators lined one wall. Classrooms filled with students aged 8 to 18. A hangar in the back housed 2 decommissioned training jets, fully restored and ready for hands-on learning. Ethan stood at the entrance as the first group of students walked in. Their eyes were wide, filled with the same wonder Laya had shown a year ago when she'd wandered into the restricted hangar. Veronica stood beside him, arms crossed, a faint smile on her face. You did it, she said. Ethan shook his head. We did it. She glanced at him. I still think you should have taken the title. Director of the Valor Foundation has a nice ring to it. I don't need a title, Ethan said quietly. I just need to be here. Veronica nodded. Fair enough. They watched as the students filed into the simulator room, guided by instructors Ethan had personally trained. One of them was Kyle, the engineer Ethan had saved during the explosion. He'd asked to be part of the program, said he wanted to give back. Laya appeared at Ethan's side, her wrist fully healed, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Can I try the simulator today? She asked eagerly. Ethan smiled. You have to wait your turn like everyone else. Laya groaned but grinned. Then she ran off to join the other students. Veronica watched her go. She's going to be a pilot one day. I know, Ethan said, and I'm terrified. Veronica laughed softly. You'll survive. Ethan looked at her. Over the past year, something had shifted between them. They weren't friends exactly, but they understood each other in a way most people didn't. They'd both lost something, and they'd both found a way to build something new from the wreckage. "Thank you," Ethan said quietly, "for believing in this." Veronica met his eyes. "Thank you for reminding me what's worth fighting for." Inside the simulator room, the first group of students strapped into their seats. The instructor gave the countdown. "Flight systems online. Preparing for takeoff in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The simulator screens lit up. The cockpit vibrated. And for the first time, a new generation of pilots felt what it was like to leave the ground. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching. He thought about his wingman, about the crash, about the years he'd spent running from the sky. And then he thought about Leia, about Kyle, about the hundreds of students who would walk through these doors in the years to come. He hadn't lost his wings. He'd just learned how to use them to lift others. Veronica stepped beside him, her arms still crossed, her expression softer than it had been a year ago. "You know," she said, "Vanguard just approved funding for a second location. Denver, if you're interested." Ethan looked at her, surprised. "Already?" Turns out, people like the idea of giving kids a chance. Who knew? Ethan smiled faintly. Who knew? They stood together in silence, watching the simulators hum to life, watching the future take shape one student at a time. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not flying, but building something that would let others soar. Behind them, one of the jets in the hangar gleamed under the lights. Painted on its side was a simple emblem: Wings of Valor. Not a reminder of the past, but a promise for the future.